Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today we are going to be discussing all things communication. Why? Because communication is really important in pretty much any part of our society today. It's one of the key aspects of how we share ideas, how we deal with situations, how we, move forward in our career. And I have a guest returning who is one of the most fantastic people when it comes to communication. She's about as bubbly as you can get. She's as positive as you can get. And I love having her on the channel. I'd like to bring back Stefania to chat to you today. So today, for this edition of Razorwire, we have the wonderful Stefania. Now, we did have to go out and find her. She is a bit of a digital nomad. She has been on the channel many, many times, and sometimes she can be very difficult to find. So we've sent people out across icy tundras, burning deserts, and finally we have found her somewhere in Asia, I believe, to talk to us today about the wonders of communication, the importance of communication and information security. It's such an important aspect of pretty much any profession, I think, but when it comes to information security, it's a lesson I learned a little bit later on than I probably should have when I first got in nearly 30 years ago, just under 30 years ago. And it was so important I included it in my book. There's obviously going to be a link down in the description here, or, maybe somebody will put a little icon up here. But anyway, I have found Stefania once more after many moons, who is going to come and talk to us about the importance of this. Stefania, hello.
Hello, Jim. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. So thank you so much for having me, and also to talk about this topic, because to your point, I think there's a lot of, when people first get into tech, they're like, oh, I'm going to be a technical person working a technical job. So I'm going to learn, the frameworks, the processes, the technology. And then what happens is we kind of forget, especially when we talk, for example, about DevSecOps, we talk about people, processes, and technology in that order, because actually we are people and we work in teams, and we have to work with each other. We are not AI robot agents, not just yet, at least. So especially working in security, because what happens when you have a cybersecurity incident and you're working in a global organization with employees from all different countries and cultures in a very high stress environment? And, in those moments, communication really matters. The message, there's an incident, what you say to the engineer who's fixing it and what you say to the board or to the legal team is going to be, okay, same event, but very, very different messaging. So thank you so much for having me here to talk about it today.
It's always a pleasure, Stefania. And you're absolutely right. And I think, the way we communicate has obviously changed quite significantly over the last, 4 or 5 years now, since the horrors of being locked down, as many of us were over the years. It's become more and more important to kind of change or amend maybe some of the ways that we communicate. No longer do we spend a lot of time with one another in the office, which is what we tended to do when I first got in. I commute up to London every day. I work with a team of people. Yeah, there was a lot less online ability to have conversation back then, but over time, obviously, that became quite an important thing. And the ability to collaborate has gotten much, much better as comms has gotten better. Actual comms technology has gotten better. You're in Asia at the moment. I'm in the UK. Other than the time difference, we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation sort of 30 years ago. But then one of the things I do feel that we've missed out on quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years since this is that kind of like body language aspect. You hear about how important body language is in human communication and human interactions. Communication is absolutely key in pretty much any profession, but infosec, where it can get very charged, where there's a lot of kind of high profile stakes at times, especially as you mentioned during incidents. But I was talking with a number of psychologists the other day about another podcast we're going to do. One of the things that was really, really important, and something you actually mentioned in your sort of preamble before we kind of launched into it, understanding culture of organizations, different cultures of people. Obviously, if you're in Asia, sometimes you can communicate very differently than somebody you do in the States or somebody in the UK. You have to be sensitive about some of the things that you say that might be considered fine in the UK or America or wherever, but are potentially culturally sensitive wherever you are. When you first join an organization and you're kind of getting to grips with your new role and it comes into the kind of stakeholder piece, the working between teams, what's your kind of first steps? What do you do?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that as well. What's kind of important is when you join in a new role, are you one of the things is kind of, are you a replacement or are you a brand new? Are you the first one in this role? Because especially if that's you, then you have this kind of other element. But I think for both, it's kind of fairly consistent. What I would tend to do is, and almost in the interview, you ask, who will I be working with? Who are the main people or teams or countries, offices? Who will I be collaborating with? So just understanding, usually within an organization, you're probably going to spend 60 to 80% of your time with most groups, and the other 20 will be with lots of other different people, but more one-off. So the main people you're working with, having an understanding a little bit about them, their experience, where they're from. So, you can take these cultural pieces into account. And also, because not just cultures country-wise, but also generationally as well, different people have grown up with different tech. So I find for me, one of the most important questions I ask is, what is your preferred way of communication if I need to get hold of you? Would you prefer an email, a Slack message, a phone call, knocking on your desk if we were all, in the office every day? So I think the first thing that I'll do is the teams or the people I'm working with is kind of having that conversation to understand their preferred ways of working. Because I don't want to come in like bull in a china shop and be like, this is how I work, my way or no way. Not at all. Even in a leadership role, I think it's important to have these conversations to understand who you're working with. And then the second thing that I usually will ask them, and this is, if say there's like maybe 5 people who I'm going to be working with a lot, I'll ask each and every one of them, like, okay, well, how's it going so far? What's been your experience of working here? And also what are you missing, or what are the challenges, or what can I help you with? Like, what's something that's on your mind that's like, oh yeah, I really need that. So I worked in an organization and I joined a team. It was a small startup, and I asked everyone I worked with, and they actually all had a very similar answer. And it turned out someone in the States had this process for doing reporting, and everyone in Europe was like, yeah, we really want that reporting. So then I made that kind of my focus. I then automated it. So it was no more pivot tables, all in Python pandas. So that was a really good quick win success story. But that was really because of making the effort to speak to everyone that I was going to be working with and understand what's important to them, what are the priorities, what are the experience, and these preferred ways of working. Because having these conversations will help to build trust. And when you can trust each other, it really helps with the collaboration piece. It's like, I'm here to help and support you. We've got the best interest. Let's try and align it with the business goals. But it's really about, getting that synergy and working together efficiently as a team, rather than being like, well, I'm from England and this is how I work, and I'm just going to assume everyone is like that. So really having that listening and empathy and active questioning.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because again, you mentioned trust. One of the big things that we suffer from in information security is, and again, I mentioned it many, many times, and I mentioned it in my book as well. It's like, and it is an old term, so please take that into account for those of you out there. But we are viewed as the man, the guy in the suit, the person in the suit that comes down, and it's like, oh God, security's here. What do they want? Mm-hmm. Are they going to stop us from doing what we need to do? And as you say, breaking that mold and by finding efficient ways of communicating is really, really key. But there's also a professional change as well. When you speak to the business owners, you speak in one format, in one particular way, or you find that way. But you've done a lot of work with development teams and IT teams as well. I mean, I've done the same thing. That's a different level of communication, because it's like, and I love you IT guys out there. I am one of you, or we used to be back in the day before I get torn apart. I likened it to a pack of wolves. If you don't show that you don't know what you're talking about and that you can't talk on the same kind of level that they do, it tends to fall apart very, very quickly. And I know that you're fantastic, especially when it comes to developers. Sometimes when I go into audit people, obviously I'm coming in on an audit capacity, so I have to try and make sure that whoever I'm communicating isn't worrying that they're giving me more information that's going to fail them during their audit, especially in things like PCI DSS. And that I'm just there to kind of find out what the situation is. Do you find that when you talk to the C-suite, you talk in one type of language in one way, and then when you're sat down with the developers, it's like you almost want to kind of say, look, we're all in this together kind of thing, because they don't want you to be the person in the suit coming down to check in on them.
Yeah, and 100%. And it is almost like these are switching hats. So, for the last, 10-ish years, it was very much my experience where it's like, 10 a.m., I'm meeting with developers and talking through the stack trace. And then 11 a.m., I'm talking with the exec board about the value of the program and the transformation. And then at 1 o'clock, I'm talking with, one of the security managers about how to align the other stakeholders in the business and kind of hurdle the cats. And exactly like you said, even though the overall kind of goal might be the same, to be secure, it's very much what you say is very, very different and very tailored. So I like to think of it almost like a pyramid model where at the top, the exec, you just give them the one line. 7 words might be enough. If there's an incident, they might just need to know there's an incident with our web page authentication. It's being fixed right now. That's all they might need. They don't need to know exactly what open source component or exactly necessarily who team, etc. But on the flip side, if you're going to talk to the developer about this, then you need to go in kind of a lot more detail. And similarly to what you said, with that kind of credibility piece, I think it's very important that whoever you're speaking to, you do try and meet them at their level. And things like, mirroring, whether it's verbal language, body language, kind of, I just say, vibe. Especially, when you speak to very technical people, sometimes I get this less, but especially when I was early in my career and gender balance wasn't always as good, I almost felt like sometimes people were looking for me to trip up, because the minute I said I got my, EC2 and S3 or, CVSS and CVE confused, they would jump on it. So sometimes it's also just about diffusing that situation and putting your hands up, being like, okay, I don't know everything. I know enough to be dangerous. I have an understanding of what you're doing, and I can think of it architecturally and how the awesome work you're doing fits into the wider piece. But I can't do your job. You're already doing a great job at that. I just need to know what I need to know to be able to progress further. So it's really, the whole kind of communication, getting people on your side, and ways like mirroring and body language and just choice of words can make a big difference with that.
I can tell you've been a student of NLP for a while there. Something I speak to a lot of kind of people coming up in the ranks, they want a bit of mentorship and that kind of thing. I say to them, look, communication isn't just kind of writing things down. It's not just talking and learning how to talk and articulate appropriately. It's also understanding the psychology of the situation. We talk about instant response, for instance. When you're sitting there and you're kind of talking about, maybe upping some security or doing a review or whatever, and there's no stress involved, that's one thing. But anybody who's been an incident, like a serious incident internally, will see how very quickly good communication breaks down. You've got the people at the top who are like, what is going on? We need to know when it's being resolved. You've got the people around you who are saying, well, whose fault it is? And then you've got your team saying, look, we just need to get this resolved. Can we just deal with what happened and whose fault it was, if it was anyone's fault, because I don't like doing that myself, at the end when we do the lessons learned bit. But first and foremost, we need to get back to an operational perspective. And one of the things that I've recommended a lot of companies I've gone in to build an incident response team is a good PR person. Who has the ability, not just for kind of external people or organizations like the media or whatever, if it's something, if it's a particularly large incident in a particularly well-known firm, but it's also managing the internal communications to free up the team time to be able to do what they need to do. Because, and I'm sure you've been in this situation, it's really hard to deal with a situation when you're being asked literally every 5 to 10 minutes, is it fixed? Is it fixed? Is it fixed? And all that does is stress you out, which means your comms ability drops because you're like, go away.
Yeah.
Go away and let me fix it. But you can't say that to some of these people, because then it all blows up and you end up not dealing with the situation. When the stress is kicking in and it gets really, really tough, What are your tips for people doing that?
I think it's a very interesting place because there's the stuff you do at the time, and there's the stuff you will do before to be proactive. So I'll just touch on that first, because for those listening, we hope that you at least, you might think of having these things in place if you don't already. So it's good to think of the what ifs. If there is an incident, what is your, not only the backup and recovery plan, because I think a lot of organizations will, have the tech piece tip, we'll spin up, we'll back up, etc. But also, what is the communication plan? When there is an incident, where are the teams working and storing the information? So for example, when I was working at GitLab, we had a really good incident response system, because we would create a page, which was then public, so our customers could see it, and then we would have the developers working on it. So we would have that transparency, so it wasn't so much the case where someone's knocking every 5 minutes what's going on. People can look on the page. On the flip side, I remember there was one particular incident, and we actually got an internal memo in our Slack. Can everyone at GitLab stop refreshing the page, because our developers can't access it because everyone's on it. So you want to make sure you have the scalability for access. So having doing the foundations so that you have, like you said with the PR person, having a communication plan. Like if you want to have the updates, it's going to be on this page, and using the wonderful world of AI summary, even the exec could click the AI summary button and get that kind of 2 or 3 liner. So I think that takes a lot of the kind of other people pressure off, because, if you have a centralized place where you're storing work, where people know where to go, they don't need to be like, where do I find it? And you share it. They just know it's there. That can really help and take eyes and ears off the people who are really fixing the problem. For those people that are fixing the problem, I know you said about the NLP, I'm also very much into my yoga and mindfulness. So it's kind of the simple things like breathe. Like, yes, let's all being hacked and it's stress, but just take like three deep breaths. Those 10 seconds will at least, make sure that you're a bit more corpus mentis, and not, if you're, breathing with the 5% of your lungs, you're not getting enough oxygen, your brain's not going to be working, you're going to be stressed, you're triggering your kind of nervous system to have adrenaline, which, happens in incidents. So breathing and, having water and having this transparency with your communication. So having an agreed place, which is where the work that you're doing will be accessible to others. So you kind of then bypass the stress of the other people kind of reaching out to you like, what's going on there? And likewise, communicating with whoever is your manager and be like, I need to focus. I'm working on this. My work, the answers, the work, it will be in this incident. If anything is urgent, then let me know. But please, I need to focus. Don't distract me, because everyone knows, clicking around, that we can't parallel process. If you get distracted, it's a lot harder to get into the flow. So I think, having those the foundation, including not only the tech plan but the communication plan in place, will help. And then when you're there, just remember, we are human, not machines. Breathe, have some water. If it's late, have some coffee, but not too much coffee. Make sure that you're in a state where you can work on this, and the higher ups have the visibility of where to access the information.
No, I totally agree. Weirdly enough, one of the first techniques I learned from an old friend of mine who's a Marine was the box breathing technique to kind of just calm yourself down. And I've used that loads of times, both in situations where you're physically there and you're seeing things kick off and, of course, tensions rise. It's just really, really important to learn how to do that and to, as you say, take on water, make sure that you've got 5 minutes to yourself to compose your thoughts, because when incidents are kicking off and comms is flying all over the place, you do need to sit down and kind of pull back from the weeds of where you was looking and just reevaluate what the situation is and how things are working. I mean, I used to war game what would happen in a pandemic before the pandemic, and people used to laugh at me and say, that's never going to happen. Well, they're not bloody laughing anymore, are they?
Yeah.
But with the war gaming, one of the things that I taught is exactly as you say, a communications plan. And one of the things I would always do is find the most amenable person with the best communication skills in the group that's trying to deal with the situation, or have somebody, specifically aligned to do that, to deal with comms, to just take it off the table when it comes to dealing with the top end people, or other people around the business so that the team can communicate efficiently with one another. Because, as you say, it's really, really important to make sure that, they're not getting stressed out with the amount of comms coming in, or even seeing some of the comms. Because, as I said, tensions rise. People with less better communication skills can sometimes put things a little bit bluntly, which kind of put you into a bit of or your team into a bit of a psychological spiral, which means, well, why are we being blamed for this? We're trying to fix it. And it is hard. It's hard to get right as well. And I think that's why wargaming has become so popular, mainly because you can see how your team is going to perform. And in a lot of legislation these days, not legislation frameworks, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, it's actually a requirement to test and to train your incident response staff on how to kind of do incident management. And a big chunk of that is that communications piece. Have we gotten better over the time that you've been doing it as an industry, or do you still see the same issues cropping up time and time again with other professionals who may be a little bit younger to the profession, or maybe they're a bit like me, old and a bit tired, or a bit old school and maybe never learnt those communication skills? We still do have them, I must admit. I mean, what are you finding with the organizations and the people you're interacting with?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed is that people are starting to see more value in the soft skills. So I do a lot of work, specifically effective communication in tech.com. And this is very much something that's in demand, because what we're finding is, if we look at the average, technical person, massive generalization, someone is good at tech, they work on tech, they get promoted, senior, maybe lead. Okay, they become a manager or maybe like a head of, they get quite senior because of that awesome technical skills. But now they look around, and whilst before, when they were just a junior employee doing tech with their technical friends, now they're like, okay, not only do I have to manage downwards, I also have to report upwards, so do exec, and I might have to do horizontal and work with teams and departments that aren't tech. So all of a sudden, maybe I need to speak to legal, or maybe I need to speak to the go-to-market and marketing team. But what I've noticed is that people are starting to become aware that these communication skills are more important. And especially in these larger organizations where there are these multicultural teams. And if we look at, say, I don't know, over the last, 20 and obviously 50 years, people are moving around a lot more. So whilst before most people, their parents might be from the country, everyone lives in the same, a lot of people are having influence from other areas. Like for me, my dad is English, my mum is South American, the South American family live in Paris. As a family, when we're talking, it's trilingual. We're just all chatting in whatever we feel like. So I have quite an appreciation of how different cultures have different languages and how that reflects as a person. And this reflects not only in, choice of language, but also how we work as teams. So there's a really great book called The Culture Map, which I recommend to everyone out there. And it talks about multicultural communication, because not only is it, context, it's also how you lead, how you give feedback, how you prioritize, how you make decisions. And if you look at, different countries, it's like a spectrum. So, as a generalization, people can say that usually some of the newer countries like Australia, America, we like very clear instructions. Oh, we've had a meeting, here's the little summary with all the action items. So we're all very clear and aligned on what we need to do. But in some other cultures, if you look at kind of Middle Eastern and the Far East as well, if you were to send the summary, that could almost be insulting. Like, but don't you trust me to do it? What do you mean? And then what you end up with is kind of almost this spectrum. So some countries that, maybe might be in the middle, like say, for example, Middle East or India, they might think, oh yeah, UK, you're very blunt people. But then people from the East are like, oh yeah, Middle Eastern, very blunt, as an example. And the book has really great examples. So I didn't mean to offend anyone in the audience in case I quoted it wrong. It's getting more and more important. Are we getting better? I hope so. I'm optimistic. But like to your earlier point, it's a different environment. The last 5 years, all of a sudden, we're a lot more virtual, which gives us a lot more access to work across different time zones. I'm in Vietnam, +7 GMT. Yesterday, I was on a call with someone in California and the UK and here, and it was two of us were in the dark. Let's put it that way. But you really have to be aware of these things, because, what might be considered normal in one culture could be seen as offensive in another, which is why my kind of first point around or the people that you're working with, have the conversation. What's your preferred way of working? What does good look like? What are the challenges? What would make you happy, kind of almost thing, to have that understanding. So I'm feeling optimistic about the future, but I definitely think it's a gap, especially in security, because when we're in these high stress situations, it's hard to do best practice. It can go to a more, I think it's the reptilian brain, the one that's like, we're on fire. So it's something that if we can communicate effectively all the time, in the incident will do well. If we don't communicate effectively naturally, we have very little chance of doing it in a high stress situation.
And it's another good point you made there about being on a call from Vietnam to somebody over in California and somebody in the UK. We have to remember as well, sometimes when we're doing this kind of communication, especially in a high pressure, high stress environment, it's the beginning of my day. I mean, as time of recording, it's like 10:36 in the morning. It's like 5, 6 o'clock over there for you. So you may have already worked for an entire day. You might be knackered. You just want something to eat. Some people get hangry. I don't. I can go for days without food. I've had to before. You have to understand as well when you're communicating with people where they currently actually sit within their kind of day. If they're knackered at the end of the day and they've been dealing with this incident for the last 8 hours and you're kind of taking over so they can go and get some rest, because that's the other thing that, tends to get sacrificed a fair bit. I have done it before for plenty of times where, and why is it always incidents kick off on Friday at bloody 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And then you're there over the weekend trying to figure out as part of the team what the hell's going on, and you're all remote, and it can get stressful, especially if you've got, a partner who's calling you in the background going, go and spend some time with the kids, or can we go out and have something to eat? It is really difficult. But it's interesting what you mentioned about the cultures as well, because I mean, I've been a consultant for most of my career, and before I became started Razorthorn, I did work for a number of different firms, UK firms, but I also worked for American firms. I worked for Japanese firms as well. And I learned the value of how to communicate with those people in a way that's efficient. I say those people, I don't mean it that way, but Americans, for instance, do not have any time for the flim flam that us UK like to talk about the weather for the first 5 minutes. Whereas in Switzerland, they like a bit of preamble about, a couple of minutes worth of conversation in general. And it's considered rude if you kind of just barrel in and, sort of trying to get to the point. So it's sometimes interesting to see kind of like New Yorkers talk to people in Switzerland because they don't like the preamble, time is money kind of thing. But then with the Japanese, it's also, you've got to be aware of who you're talking to within the organization. And I think it's like that across a lot of, East Asia as well. You have to be mindful of where they sit within the hierarchy, because sometimes communication can be a little bit tough. It's gotten a lot better, don't get me wrong, but I've done a few howlers in my time. Do you think that it should be the curriculum for, if I was at one point and you were at some point, when you first get into this career and you're getting into infosec, maybe you've got an analyst job, the SOC analyst or something like that, the first kind of stage of your career, is there a sort of communications curriculum, not curriculum, but tips that you would give to them on what to look for? We mentioned NLP. I've done my own studies. One of my mentors was very big on it. Is there a kind of set standard that you would kind of recommend to people who are listening to this and going, well, okay, that's good. I now know that communication is important. What do I need to learn? Where do I go? What do I look for?
Yeah. So,
and I know you have a website that you're going to mention, so you can mention it now.
Exactly. So, I've recently launched my project, Effective Communication in Tech.com, which really helps kind of this use case, because I think there's kind of two elements to it. So I know we've talked a lot about incidents. So it's kind of communication within an organization, but there's also communication for personal growth. So, for example, if you're able to explain yourself better, to kind of get what's in your head and your thoughts, your wants, your professional wants and desires, if you're able to convey them and influence and persuade those around you, so that maybe if you're working on a larger project, say if you're doing a particular bit of compliance and you specifically want to focus on the cloud side and you're not as interested in the other bits, can you convey that in a way that it works and sounds good? Because, I'm sure there's ways that you can kind of say it badly. And then, yes, on the incident side, then it comes back to, okay, how do I operate within the organization? And likewise, the multicultural piece that we were just discussing. So I think a lot of it comes down to, I say the basics, but almost like a kind of self-aware self-assessment. So kind of how do you feel, where do you feel you rank with it? From my experience, I've met a lot of really, really, really awesome technical people, really introverted, but so good at tech. And then sometimes communication isn't quite there. And even stuff like doing like mind mapping. If you're thinking whether you have an important meeting, an important project, any of these kind of things, getting your thoughts down on paper and then thinking of it almost, like I said, this pyramid model. So how can I do it in one line? How could I do it in 3 lines? And then what's the, 20-line version that, if someone really wanted the detail? And understanding when to say which one and to who. I've met a lot of people. I ask them a question and they give me the 12-line answer, and I'm like, okay, I only really needed sentence 4, but thanks, I've got the detail. So it's kind of about having this kind of self-awareness and understanding. So in terms of where to go, I'd say, hi, check me out. There's also lots of other kind of, there's a lot of kind of free stuff available on YouTube. And even if you're just looking at, things like persuasion, influence, communication, and also not just all the types of communication. So verbal, the words you choose to say or to write, to speak, but also non-verbal as well. We do a lot on camera. So if you always have your camera off, or if you join a meeting and you're still in your pajamas, or if you're, say, a woman, you have smeared makeup on, or, it's not going to come across as professional. Don't go to your salary promotion meeting in your pajamas. So, and I think sometimes, especially with younger generations, because we've had COVID and there's a lot of stuff on social media, it can be a bit, confusing about what is appropriate and kind of what isn't. So something that, if you are working in an organization is, maybe look a few levels up at someone who might be in a leadership position, but who isn't actually good at that. And you can also ask them, what their experience was. Or doing, like, say, with either your manager or to someone who's a equivalent level, doing a 360 and kind of asking them, like, what do you think of my communication style? Because you might think you're doing great. And they're like, actually, you can be really aggressive. And if you don't get your way, you just keep on going until you get your way. And it's not nice to work with. I had a private coaching client and she saw me speak at a OWASP London event. And then she reached out to me because she's like, I thought you were amazing and you were really succinct. And I want to be more succinct, because she was kind of more in the, the 20-line kind of answer. So as part of one of the exercises we did, she'd had a new talk coming up. And so she showed me the slides. I'm like, okay, for each slide, describe it in 1 sentence. That's actually quite hard. But it was really valuable to her because it really helped to take all the information and all the ideas on this individual slide and put it into 1 sentence. And that's your key message. And that key message can be, whether it's in a slide, whether it's in a meeting, that's the kind of the sentence that you want people to remember. And then when it comes to kind of all the detail and all that could be an email. Or that could be in some kind of internal wiki or compliments page to store. So I think, especially if you are starting out early in your career, it's okay. Like I said, people focus on the technology so much, they forget about the soft skill. Being self-aware enough to ask those around you what they think. If you're too shy to ask at work, ask your family. They probably know as well, or ask your friends, because at least it can help you understand. Because it may be a case of, yeah, you're always really quiet, but when you do speak, it's actually quite good. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't know I was quiet. Maybe I should speak up more. So it can be really helpful to get that, if you're not naturally self-aware, to get that external, input and validation.
And I think you strike on a really good point there. I think it's very important when you're very early in your career and to reevaluate throughout your career as well, because you do change. The way I am now is very different from the way I was sort of 27 years ago. I've done a lot of MIGS sort of buyer tests over the years. I have my methods and I've seen them change over time, but I like to go back and there's a lot of free resources for this kind of thing now. And that's a good place to start, because you've got to understand yourself before you can kind of really go down this route. You've got to understand what your good points are and what your bad points are. And you've got to start somewhere. And that's a really good way to figure out where you are in your headspace, how you communicate, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Because they've done a really good job over the years of defining it. It's not 100%, nothing is, but it's a good place to start. I'm a big advocate, for instance, for Chris Voss. I love Chris Voss.
Yeah, he's great.
His book, Never Split the Difference, absolutely fantastic for negotiation. How to effectively communicate with people who are both hostile to you, how to get them on side, absolute masterclass of that. And there's a lot of stuff out on YouTube if you're out there and you want to find out a bit more. It's Chris Voss. Just do a search for him. He's done a lot of different talks over the years. I'd love to get him on the channel. Might have to work on that one. But yeah, great place to start. And then, just understanding standard psychology. I think definitely one of the things, and this is a bit non-conventional, I'd like to get your opinion on this one. I've been having a lot of conversations with psychologists in this space recently, Beck McCowan, Yanya over the burnout thing and all the rest of it. And I've kind of learned that it's usually a good idea to learn to spot negative traits like narcissism, like psychopathy, psychopath, whatever it is, understand what those traits are, because weirdly enough, you do come across them quite a bit, and understanding how to protect yourself from the types of communication you sometimes get from those individuals. And as InfoSec has gotten more, this is very controversial, as InfoSec has gotten more popular and more important to organizations, we're starting to see a lot of people come in with some of these traits, and it's very interesting speaking to some of the people that I speak to on this channel, because they kind of have confirmed to me that you do have to learn how to watch yourself a little bit, protect yourself from these people, and just either cut them off or whatever. But being able to spot the verbal, the physical, and the communication cues will pay you in dividends down the line. On avoiding these people or learning at least how to handle the situation. Is that something, am I going completely off piece there, or is that something you would recommend to people? We've got like five more minutes. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what you've described is true in many, not only in work, but also in personal life, even like family life, friends, in work as well. I haven't seen it so much specifically in security, but I've just worked in loads of great teams. But I think it is kind of very true that you need to, don't be so naive that like, oh yeah, everyone's going to be my best friend and everyone wants to work towards business goals, because you do get bad actors sometimes. Someone's very resentful, and then on their last day, they do some damage, and that can build over time. So if you're getting the tail end of someone who maybe didn't get promoted or doesn't like the new tech stack that we're going with, you have to be very aware of that. And in terms of mood, like we can't all be all positive and smiley and everything the whole time, but actually approaching work with a positive intent can have massive changes around you. If I'm going to come on here and be like, oh yeah, the weather's terrible, but it's been raining all day, then you might also say something like negative to kind of meet me at my level. But if I went, it's like, oh, I had a really nice walk today, then you might come with something else positive. So those kind of things, that type of mirroring is very, very common. And to your point about sociopathy and psychopathy, that's like less common. I don't know how true it is, but I've heard that if you psychopaths don't yawn, like if someone yawns and someone else yawns, that's more common. But yeah, I think it's one of them, sociopath. It might not be true, but one of the traits is no empathy. So it's like, oh, you're totally burned out. You haven't slept. You haven't eaten. You're the only person working on this. It's like, well, I don't care. Whilst, a lot of people would be like, okay, well, do you want me to grab your coffee? Or like, oh, is there anything else we can do to make your life a bit easier? So I think it's just, having this awareness, self-awareness of yourself, but also of those around you, to see that if you do approach with positive intent, are you getting that back or not? Because if you're not, that's kind of the signs of something bigger. And really kind of with communication, it's really about who you're talking to, because that will tailor what you say, how you say it, and then also when and where you say it. So the kind of the five questions really.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see, again, being the old man here, 27 years ago, there was a certain personality type that we used to come across quite a bit. A lot of what we used to call the doom merchants, the FUD guy, people, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And and you get accused of being very pessimistic when you're an infosec professional. I get this from my partner all the time. Why are you very pessimistic? It's like, I'm not pessimistic. I'm just realistic. I don't believe in overly optimistic myself, or overly pessimistic. Obviously, be positive. I'm not saying don't be, but when the SHTF moment hits, you hit into your realism thing. It's like, yes, let's be positive, we can fix the thing, but we have to understand that there's a negative element here that we also have to handle. And it's really interesting to be able to flip and learning how to change your mental profile to relate to whatever the situation is. And this is why I love chatting to you, Stefania. You're optimistic as you can feasibly be, but you also understand the value of being realistic as well. And as you say, if you're spotting somebody who's being massively negative towards you for whatever reason, I think you're the master at turning that around personally, but far better than I am. I'm way too direct. I'll turn around to somebody and say, what's the problem? And sometimes people can see that as being too direct, whereas as you've got a different technique. And I think all techniques work in the long run, as long as you develop yourself and you develop that ability to communicate. You've got to understand yourself, and you've got to try and understand the people around you as well. And when you do come across those rare types who are genuinely really hostile, really toxic, kind of like, just cut them out. Just don't entertain it. Deal with them as much as you have to, but just cut it dead as quickly as you can. Just be massively professional and just don't go one way or the other. Deliver what you need to, and then define where you're going to go afterwards, especially if it's like a boss or whatever. I've had toxic bosses in the past. Sorry if any of you are watching this, but not all of them. Some of them have been really positive, but yeah, I learned how to handle a lot of interesting mindsets over the years. We've reached the top end of our time. It's absolutely fantastic to speak to you again. I'm sure you're probably going to go off and chill out in the Vietnamese evening, somewhere to eat and a beer. I'm kind of envious because I've still got a full day's worth of work. Definitely looking forward to having you back a number of times to discuss kind of the adventures you've been on and other stuff around communication and DevSecOps and various other stuff that I know that you are absolutely fantastic at. For all of you out there, thank you ever so much for watching Razorwire. We're constantly generating new content. We've just topped over 11,500 subscribers at the time of recording of this. It's absolutely fantastic. We're getting like 1,000 new subscribers every month or so, and it's starting to ramp up. So thank you ever so much for subscribing. And to the 85% of people who haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. It's great for the channel. It helps with the algorithm, and it helps to get the message on information security out there. Because let's face it, some of the stuff that we talk about kind of gets a bit shadow banned. So it's always good to have that notification button on, just in case, new stuff comes out and you potentially miss it because it's not been put in front of you. But Stefania, do you want to kind of just tell people where to come find yourself on that website?
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to find out what I'm up to, if you want to talk more about these important topics, you can find me on www.effectivecommunicationintech.com, where I specialize in workshops for corporates and also for individuals, and doing some online courses as well. And if you're interested in me as a speaker, I also have devsecops.com for my personal brand. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, and have a great day.
No problems. And you can find those links down in the description. We'll make sure that they're there as well. Thank you, Stefania. Thank you to everybody out there, and we'll be seeing you again soon.
In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of lots of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.